I have a Sigma XQ 135mm f2.8 lens here that I'm going to be disassembling. This is a cheaper lens overall. It's a screw mount lens as well. So back here is the screw mount. You can just see by looking at it that it's a much cheaper lens than a lot of the other ones in its construction. And that really shows in how it's constructed internally as well. It uses a lot of adhesives and cheaper construction techniques, specifically the way that the stop down lever back here is coupled up to the diaphragm is I found it's very cheap and it can easily break. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong with this lens. And because of all the adhesives and other things that it uses, it is much harder to repair. It's almost, I wasn't able to take this lens completely apart because I got down to a certain stage with the diaphragm mechanism where I just couldn't take it apart anymore because I think there is adhesive holding everything together. So this lens is actually it's pretty difficult to repair, but you can get in, and what I'm going to be doing is getting access to the diaphragm so you could at least clean that off, and then also getting access to the inside of all these optics and taking off the body sections so that those could be cleaned individually. I'm going to start on the back of the lens and go in from the back to get access to the back of the diaphragm, and then also start removing some of the body sections on the back side. So here is the mounting plate on the back going around, and it's just is held in place by 3 slotted screws going around on this top ring here, and that will remove this entire back mounting plate when I undo these. There's the mounting plate, and it does have a little metal post that can slide out as well, right there. Set those aside. And there's a second metal post right here on the back that's also part of the coupling of the stop down lever to the diaphragm. And I'll talk more about that during the reassembly, but those posts are going through this entire back assembly and coupling everything from the mounting plate to the diaphragm. Next, there's this top level ring, which is what the mounting plate was actually attaching to with those slotted screws, and that just unscrews like this. And now we have access to this next ring, which has the aperture control ring, and there's this other plate holding on the aperture control ring, and it's just held in place by 3 screws going around here. Okay, so I'll set that aside. This back plate I just removed has the tube going in here that surrounds the optics. And on the main lens body, now I have access to the aperture control ring going around here with this little knob on the side there. I can just move it back and forth. And there's nothing actually holding it on at this stage, so I'm just going to lift this entire aperture control ring off. And the one thing is that there's a little ball bearing right here. So the aperture control ring has a set of grooves, and then the ball bearing actually rests on the lens body here. So I'm going to remove the ball bearing. So with the aperture control ring removed, you can actually see down into the inside of the lens a little bit better on this back section. So as I focus in and out, you can see that there's 2 bars on either side here, and 2 little couplers on either side that are actually holding the inner focusing section to the outer focusing section, so that as I focus in and out, the lens moves up and down instead of just spinning around. The other things on this back section are the back optical group here in the center, and then up here is the stop down lever. So this is what actually is getting coupled from the outside of the lens and the mounting plate into is controlling the diaphragm. And then back here is how the aperture is controlled. So there's this bar back here, and as I depress this and I move this back and forth, you can see the aperture open and close. So what I'm going to do now is just get access to the diaphragm blades on the back side of the lens. And this is really, if there's something like oil or debris on the diaphragm blades, or there's any dust or fungus on the glass on the back section, this is what you would want to do. To do that, I'm going to remove this back glass piece, and it's just held in place by this black ring going around here. And there's no slots for a spanning wrench on this lens. Unfortunately, a lot of the pieces that you have to unscrew don't have areas for a spanning wrench, but it should be easy enough to remove this piece at least. And now I'll just remove this glass piece, the back glass group. Set that aside. And now I have access to the back of the diaphragm blades, so I can look in and see the back of the diaphragm blades. And I am going to get access to the front of the diaphragm blades, but that is going to involve several more steps. So if there's a lot of oil on, or if there's just a little bit of oil on here, you could actually go in with a Q-tip. It is a little bit far down into the lens to actually be cleaning, but because it does involve a few more steps to get access to the front, if there's just a tiny amount of debris that can be cleaned off easily, this is what I would recommend doing. For now, I'm going to flip over the lens and start going in from the front side of the lens to get access to the front of the diaphragm blades as well. So on the front side, you can see that the name ring here, again, it doesn't have any slots for a spanning wrench. And when I first took apart this lens, what I had to do to unscrew this was go in with a piece of pipe here, and then some, let's see if like a rubber band or some padding or something to actually go in and unscrew this. Because it was pretty tightly on there. But now I've kind of loosened up, so I can just grab this and undo this. Okay, set that aside. Next we have this body section here, which has this ring on it. So this ring is just held in place by 3 screws going around here. And these were screws that had some adhesive on them that I had to strip away using some cleaning solution. Okay, so I can remove that. And you can see now I have this tube here, and then the front of the lens and the main lens body there. So I'll set that aside, that body section aside. Next, on this section, I'm going to remove the entire center of the focusing ring, so you can kind of see it focus in and out here. I'm going to remove the center section from the outside section. So I'm going to flip the lens back over again and focus into it, or out to infinity, so that it's not sitting on the glass as I flip it over here. And now on the back section, I'm going to remove these 2 rails, or the couplings to these 2 rails. So what's coupling the outside of the lens to the inside of the lens right here. So these brass sections, they're each held in place by 2 screws, and then the couplings themselves will just lift out of place once these screws are removed. Alright, so what I want to do now is, on this front section, I'm going to grab this intersection here with the lens and focus this out until I can remove it fully. And that's a little hard to do since I focused into infinity before, but now I can just focus this out and past where it was going before and just remove the entire inner assembly from the outer assembly here. So what I'm left with is the focusing ring and some of the other body sections down here. And up top I have, or in this intersection, I have the glass for the front lens element, and then the intersection of the focusing mechanism. So I'm going to just set this focusing mechanism aside for a moment and go back to this section here. And the one other thing that I can remove on this that's fairly easy to remove is the focusing ring here. So the actual part from down, I think from down here to up here that you see on the outside of the lens. And it's held in place by 3 screws going around here. And I'm just going to remove this, but unless you actually want to clean the focusing ring or the focusing ring itself, you don't need to do this step. And it's probably best that you don't, because then after you take off this ring, you have to focus the lens back to infinity. I'll remove those 3 screws, and now this section here, if I spin it around a little, it should lift out. There's a little knob on this side over here. On the opposite side of this ring, there's a little, so You can kind of feel on this ring right here. There's a little knob behind here. It has to get lined up properly with a little gap right there, and then this should just slide out. So now I have the focusing ring separate from the section here that has the intersection of the focusing mechanism and the depth of field scale on it. Looking back at the intersection of the focusing mechanism here with the front glass pieces, I'm going to start removing these front glass pieces to get access to the front of the diaphragm and be able to clean the front of the aperture blades as well. And this is the piece that I wasn't able to take as far apart as I would have liked. Unfortunately, this whole block in here, I was able to get all the glass out of here out, but I wasn't able to take apart this part in here to really be able to get the diaphragm on its own. So if there's actually a problem with the diaphragm where the blades aren't working properly or they've gone out of position, I'm not really sure how to get access to that to repair that. But I will show how if there's oil or something else on the diaphragm, how you'd be able to clean that off. Or if there's dust or fungus on the inside of these optical pieces, how you could clean that off as well. So to start with, I'm going to take off this front glass piece right here, and it is held in place by a ring going around here with the 2 divots for a spanning wrench. So I'll remove this ring, set that aside, and now just remove this front glass piece. Next up, there's another ring going around here, another metal ring that I can just lift right out. And the next glass piece in here I can also just remove. And finally, on the intersection of this lens, I'm going to remove this last glass piece. And it's a little bit further down inside the lens, but it has a ring going around here with 2 spots for a spanning wrench. So I'll remove that and then be able to remove that last glass piece. Okay, got that last ring, and now this entire last glass piece should just come right out with a little bit of, there we go. So you can see the last glass piece right here. And now what I have is access to both sides of the diaphragm. So let me go in here. You can actually clean the front section here and the back side of the diaphragm. So if there's any oil, you could clean this off. But what I wasn't able to figure out, like I said, is how to actually take this piece here apart any further to get access. There should be a plate down here that is actually holding on the diaphragm. And I wasn't able to figure out how to get down there to actually be able to remove the individual blades and put the diaphragm back together. It looks like to me that this section in here you should be able to unscrew this ring going around here. But I wasn't able to unscrew that. So I wasn't able to remove either of these 2 rings, and I think it might be because there's some adhesive actually in that they're using in the threads going around here to remove it. So I wasn't quite able to take the lens as far apart as I would have liked. So now I'm going to start on the reassembly of this lens. And there are a few difficult parts about the reassembly just because of how it's put together, but it's overall very similar to the disassembly. You just have to make sure that everything lines up properly. So to start with, I'm going to put back in the front glass groups. Start with the largest optical piece here, and it just slides in place. And this stage is only hard because since these groups don't have any edges on them, it's very easy to get fingerprints all over the inside of the glass groups after you've spent a long time cleaning them off and making sure that they look great. Next, I'm going to grab this little ring here and just set that on top of the piece I just put in, and using the 2 slots for the spanning wrench, lock this down Up next is the middle-sized glass piece, and it goes like this. I'll just use a Q-tip to make sure it's sitting down inside the correct ring here. And on top of it goes this larger, or the taller metal ring, and it goes with the grooves facing up. So it just sits down there and it doesn't screw into anything. The final front glass group just sits on top of this in this ring going around here. And it's locked in place by this metal ring with the two divots for the spanning wrench. So that has the front optics put back together. Now moving back to the main lens body, I have to reattach the focusing ring. And to do this, I'm going to take the focusing ring here and then the section of the main lens body with the depth of field scale, and you can see on the inside of the focusing ring there's a little knob over here, and that has to line up with this little notch in this outer ring here going around, and once those line up, then the focusing ring will just slide on top of this, and the three screws will lock it into place going around here. So first I have to get this lined up. Now I can turn this a little bit. And then use the three slotted screws to actually lock this down in place. And because I did undo the focusing ring, later I'll have to come back and loosen these screws up a little bit and adjust this to where I need it to go specifically. But for now I'm just going to put it in this arbitrary position and then adjust it later. Now with this section reassembled, should be going back between infinity and the minimum focusing distance of about 2 meters. So with this section assembled, I'm going to put the center part of the focusing mechanism with the optics and the diaphragm back into here. So it's just going to screw into place, but I have to make sure that when I put this back in, that it goes into the right position and lines up properly. So I'm just going to get this started and then play around with it later to make sure that it's in the right, that when I screwed this back together, it's in the right position. So in the back section here, let me screw this in a little further so that it's not, just going to use this so it's not sitting on the front glass piece. So in the back section here, as I move the inner section around, I should have this lever here, the stop down lever. It needs to be lined up in front of, let's see, in front of this lever here in the aperture. So it's in the aperture control, so that when I hit that, it stops down. And this other lever over here needs to be near this slot here, and these two bars need to be lined up in the center section between these two holes on either side. So I need to rotate this a little bit. That looks good. Okay. So now on the back section, just to lock this in place, I'm going to reattach these two bars to couple it to the inner section to the outer section. So each of these bars is coupled by these metal pieces, and the bar itself goes in this little slot here, and then the upper section goes on the ring going around here and is just attached by 2 screws each. So I'm going to reattach this on both sides. So what you want to check once you have these two stages back together is that it stops over at the minimum focusing distance. It actually has like a clicking, and at the maximum focus, so at infinity, it also kind of clicks when you turn the focusing ring. And that lets you know that you have it in the right position and everything's lined up. And then on the front, and I'm not setting it down on the front side here because the front glass kind of protrudes out. So until I put on that other ring like I was doing for the reassembly, you don't want to set it down on the glass. And then on the back side here, you want to check and make sure that when I press down on this lever over here, the aperture closes, and as I move this other lever back and forth, it opens and closes the aperture. Now I'm going to reattach this ring going around here that sits on the front of the lens. It goes like that. To do that, I'm going to just screw this out and go to the focus into the minimum focusing distance. And you can notice on here that it has, this ring has a little like a screw or something over here, and that actually has to go down inside of here, so you have to kind of angle this down when you're putting it in so that that goes in first, and then the rest of it should just lock in place there. And on the front section here, now I'll reattach this. Let me go to infinity here. So I'll reattach this just at any position with the 3 screws going around here. Again, I'll make sure that it's correctly focusing to the 2 extremes once that's reattached. And then finally, just to complete the reassembly of the front, I'll screw the name ring back in to this piece that I just reattached. So that has the front of the lens, and now I can actually set this down safely on the front side as well. For the reassembly on the rest of the back of the lens, I'm going to start by putting in this back glass piece. So it just slides in place like this. Make sure that that's flat in there. And then it has this metal ring that goes on top of it. Now I'm going to reinstall the aperture control ring. And it just is going to sit over in this indentation here, so the slot in this body section right here, and has the ball bearing that goes right here. And the way the aperture control ring is actually coupled to the diaphragm is this post here. So this post moves back and forth, and then the aperture control ring has a little bar here which just slides over this post. So it's going to just sit like this. But let me get the ball bearing in there first. Just we'll slide back and forth like that and make sure that it's opening and closing the aperture properly. Looks good. And to actually lock the aperture control ring in place, I have to use this next piece, this plate here that's going to sit on top of this. And it has the 3 screws going around here. And then this plate also has a little indentation over here that sits on top of where the aperture control ring is going through the lens body. So just it's going to go like this, and has the 3 screws going in here to attach it. And I'll also reattach this black metal ring here, which is what is actually coupling the mounting plate and allows the mounting plate to be spun around independently of the lens body. I'll just screw this into place on the back section here. Now all I have to do is reattach the mounting plate to the back of the lens. And the way that the aperture control is actually getting coupled to the mounting plate and the stop down lever is this little hole right here, and these 2 metal things that I took out, the 2 metal posts. So if I put this post in this hole in the aperture control ring, you can, and let me stop this down. You can see that when I press down on this, it's actually going in and hitting that lever on the inside if everything's reattached correctly. So when I press down and I use the longer of the two posts here, it should actually be stopping down the lens. And this other post on the mounting plate itself is going to go in this back section here and go through onto the outside of the lens. There's another little hole right there behind. Let me get this in place. Okay, so I have that little post in place, so it's now coming out through the back of the mounting plate. And when you actually hit the stop down lever, metal piece over here, which is going to lift up this circle, this metal ring on the inside, it's going to lift that up and down. And what this post on the back does is that when you press on that, it also can go through, and it's a little hard to show without having that post fall out, but it can also lift that ring up and down. So it's kind of an odd setup to actually couple through the back of the lens here, couple the stop down lever into the aperture control. But what it accomplishes is that you can actually rotate the mounting plate independently of the lens, which is important for screw mount lenses, and have everything going through there, through the back of the lens, and be able to rotate things around still. So to reattach this, what I want to have is, I want the metal post over here somewhere on this side of the ring here, the side that actually gets lifted up. You can see that it's anchored on this side over here, and then this side actually gets lifted up. And I want it kind of close to this section over here where the other post is coming through, but not necessarily right next to it. I just want them kind of lined up. So I'm going to get these two together. Actually need this reversed. So I'm going to use the shorter of the two pegs here in this section and the longer one in this other section. Okay, and I'm just going to line these up again. Uh-oh. Put these together. Okay, now it should be, I hit the stop down lever, should be working properly. And like I mentioned, because this is a screw mount mounting plate, there's actually no, I guess, proper way to reattach this besides putting it on your camera and seeing how it reattaches, but I'll just reattach it in this position right here for now. And it just reattaches with these 3 screws going around on the outside of this back ring. All right, so that has the reassembly complete for this lens. If you do need to focus it back to infinity, the way that you would do that is you would, during the reassembly or after you complete the reassembly, you would take off this ring up here, and that allows you to go down and actually detach the filtering ring by just loosening up those 3 screws that were going around in the inside there. And then you can actually move that filter ring back and forth independently of the focusing mechanism so that when it's optically focused at infinity, you can lock it back down so that the filter ring here, or the focusing ring is at infinity as well. So overall, this lens is not very repairable. It's a cheaper lens, and you can definitely see that in the construction and its design. And because it does use cheaper materials and cheaper design, it's not a lot of the components actually can't be repaired well. An example of that would be this ring going around here that has the different focusing scales. A lot of lenses at the time had engraved numbers on there with like paint and stuff down in the engravings. And if there's anything wrong with that, you can really clean out the engravings or you can restore the paint. Whereas this lens just uses this metal strip going around here with little numbers painted on, and it's attached using adhesive. You could actually take off this entire metal strip. And you can see that it's all dented up and like banged up over here, and there's no way to repair that in any way. So it just ends up looking really bad, and there's no way to actually replace this component without finding another copy of this lens and taking this piece off of that one. Also in the design, it uses a cheaper mechanical design. So like the way that the stop down lever is getting coupled to the diaphragm internally, I had a lot of trouble getting everything to line up properly. So even though the design's very simple looking, it actually took a while of me just playing around and making sure that everything was lined up properly. And especially because of the adhesive and how it's constructed internally, I don't find this lens to be terribly user repairable. Its internal construction makes the disassembly difficult, and there just aren't very many parts that can be easily fixed and accessed on this lens. So unless your copy has some very simple problems, and you're a little more experienced taking apart lenses, and you know what you're doing a little more and want to put some time into this lens, I'd stay away from trying to disassemble this one.